welcome to the Giving Voice to Depression podcast, produced in partnership with the A.B. Korkor Foundation for Mental Health. I'm Terry, the creator and co-host of this podcast. I've lived with depression most of my life, and I know how easy it can be to feel all alone in the experience. I'm not alone, and you aren't either.
And I'm Dr. Anita Sands, a licensed clinical psychologist with a number of my own diagnoses, all of which bring a certain amount of anxiety and depression along with them. There is great power in shared experiences. We share our own as we engage in intimate and candid conversations with our weekly guests, exploring different perspectives on and experiences with depression.
We keep it real because depression is real. We keep it hopeful because there truly is hope, in spite of what depression tells you.
Hi, Terry.
Hello, Anita. So we spent September, which was Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, hearing firsthand from attempt survivors. Our guests, Mark and Janine, shared intimate details of their darkest days and their hard work and journeys back to lives of hope and healing. Today's guest, Craig Kramer, discusses mental health from a very different perspective.
It would be easy to describe and define Craig by his impressive resume. It includes a law career, 5 years as chief of staff for a U.S. congressman, and several high-level positions during a 24-year career with Johnson & Johnson before recently retiring. But instead, today, we're focusing on one of his most important and challenging positions, that of being a father. So here now is Craig Kramer giving his voice to depression.
When Craig's 3 children were younger, he traveled the globe for Johnson & Johnson, the largest healthcare company in the world.
I worked on cancer, I worked on HIV, I worked on Ebola, diabetes, obesity, infant and maternal mortality, especially in some of the poorer countries around the world, the poor neighborhoods in the United States. So I was doing very meaningful work.
Craig says he developed a reputation for being able to see global patterns and anticipate future changes and trends. Yet at home, Craig says he, like many, did not notice the early signs that his own family members were struggling.
This mental health challenge sort of snuck up on us. Our kids were struggling in various ways. We had an eating disorder, we had anxiety and depression and suicidality, and 2013, January 1, one of our children tried to take her life. And then halfway through the year, one of my brothers died of an opiate overdose. This was before we knew we had this epidemic of opiate use in the U.S. So he was kind of the canary in the coal mine. In my own life, I'd had episodes of, in retrospect, kind of mild depression. I later found out that, mental illness was all throughout the family. Once you start understanding and paying attention to it, you realize you grew up surrounded by it.
Before that understanding develops or is forced upon us, it can be really hard for a parent or caretaker to know what's normal and what's a serious problem in the making.
And I think that was the challenge. When does something go from a developmental issue? Teenagers are always going through phases, and
sure,
and they're growing. And when is it that, and when is it a clinical issue? When is it a crisis? It's sometimes hard to look back when you're busy having a life to say, well, gee, I missed those signs, or we didn't do enough. And you can't second guess yourself. You did the best you could, I think.
Having been raised in a time when cancer was whispered about and referred to as the C word, and mental health conditions were called, well, nothing because they were seldom acknowledged, Craig had to learn a lot. While he says his children's mental health problems started in 2003, it wasn't until a decade later, when they reached crisis level, that he really understood the stakes. Before you judge, note that research regularly cited by national mental health organizations finds it typically takes 10 years from the time symptoms of mental illness first appear until someone gets a correct diagnosis and proper treatment.
We fit the statistical model exactly. And fortunately, it wasn't too late. It was almost too late, but it took us 10 years to realize we needed to really go all in on trying to get the sort of support we needed. And even then, it wasn't easy. You get a lot of bad advice along the way from people who you trust. So that was the suicide attempt and the death by overdose.
2 years later, it was a son situation that reached crisis level.
He won an NCAA soccer championship, and he was named to the all-tournament team. He scored a goal in the championship game. He really was at the top of his life at that point. And a month later, he was arrested and later became convicted of a felony for property destruction, arising out of mental health episode that involved substances. And so we spent, we're still in that process, but we spent a good 2 years sorting through the criminal justice system and then sorting through, what was it that he needed that we had missed along the way. When you focus on one child's acute struggles, oftentimes you don't have, you give the other children sort of short shrift and don't acknowledge that they may also be struggling. So we got our hands full, and those were just some of the many mental health challenges that I think our family has been going through, our nuclear family, but also our extended family and our larger community.
As parents, how difficult it is to function, to work, to sleep, to, I will say, breathe, when you don't have any reassurance that your children are okay or maybe even alive. And I choke up just asking that question because it kind of makes me sick. But how, as parents, do you handle that?
There was a long period of years where we did not sleep well because there was either a real threat or a potential threat. It wasn't until very recently that I actually slept through the whole night and didn't wake up in the middle of the night thinking, is everybody okay? We had real reason to be concerned about that. We'd had some suicide attempts. We had certainly lots of conversations, and we knew depression and anxiety and substance use were real challenges for our kids. So, but it is exhausting, and then you have to start worrying about your own mental health. But there were so many nights where we went to bed not knowing whether we were all going to be there in the morning, and also knowing that there was nothing we could necessarily do about it if we needed to get to sleep and recover. So, I think loss of sleep is often the first sign that your mental health is going down, or it could be the first cause of that happening.
Exactly.
Burnout, right? And I was struck by your recent interview with the couple, because that was certainly conversations that we had. My wife and I disagreed on when it was an appropriate time for self-care versus really pressing yourself out there beyond your own limits. And there's no right or wrong, but it's a marathon, not a sprint.
In addition to rest and other forms of self-care, Craig stresses the need for a plan and other caring members on the team that includes more than just professionals.
We learned how to develop support plans for our children, and it wasn't just the parents who were on the inner ring of that support plan. It was siblings and friends and other family members who could be called upon and knew that they could be called upon or had permission to check in on the individual, and the individual would not be offended that Aunt so-and-so is calling you to see how you're doing, because it's understood this is the plan.
A quick note that episodes 261 and 262 of this podcast are a detailed step-by-step guide for making a personalized safety plan for yourself or a loved one. It's a very good idea to have because it gives you the opportunity to spell out key decisions and choices for your care if and when you're ever in a situation that requires that help. And you get to make those choices when you're well.
We made every mistake in the book, and a few others, and not all of it was our fault. There are a lot of system issues here. There's a whole stigma complex. There's a lot of snake oil out there in the mental health space. So,
in fact, Craig's experiences have not led him to conclude that the current U.S. mental health system is flawed, but rather,
there is no mental health system in America. There is a cancer system, and it comes in, it takes on a lot of the burden, and there's a lot of the information and education that you need. Those systems, by and large, do not exist in America. You have to build those systems yourself, make the connections between primary and specialty care, and fight the payers, and do all the things that the system will do for you if you have cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And that we're trying to change so that it should all be the same. It shouldn't be a different ecosystem or different world.
Having had intimate, first-hand exposure to the treatment of both life-threatening illnesses, Craig illustrates just how different those worlds are.
And my dad went through a cancer episode, and it could not have been more different. First of all, the primary care doctors know all about cancer. They're on all the calls. They know what the treatment guidelines, first line, second line, third line treatment. When you talk to the specialists, the oncologists, the surgeons, they're differing of opinion around specific decision points, but they're all on the same page. All of your friends and family bring you casseroles, and they want to know how they can help. I mean, that is the vision for the future for mental health. That it's the primary care doctors know something about it. Right now, they by and large don't. That they're on the journey with you. That insurance covers it all. Just like, cancer, almost every penny is covered by insurance, including, by the way, the mental health treatment that you get after surgery to make sure that you're dealing with your trauma and your anxiety and everything that comes along with cancer. That's covered by insurance.
Interesting.
So that's what we're trying to create, and there are a lot of people in the U.S. and around the world working on moving the system in that direction.
Craig is far from the only one making the comparison between mental health care and cancer care. Mental Health America, for example, promotes a before stage 4 philosophy, focused on screening for, noticing, and treating early symptoms of mental health issues to prevent the development of a more serious illness, just like we routinely do with other physical illnesses.
The good news about mental health is there are effective treatments for most things. The bad news is it's hard to connect yourself to those treatments. Because of the stigma and the fragmentation of the system and just the difficulty of navigating, most families will wait till stage 4 to finally ask for help and push hard enough to get it. And the system, frankly, is designed for that crisis care.
Through all of your experiences, and mostly, personal, though I'm sure in your professional role you've heard plenty of stories, are there key takeaways? Are there things like if you could just sort of grab somebody by the shoulders and, say, you really need to understand this, or this whole system isn't going to change, this whole experience is going to continue to be as isolated and dangerous as it currently feels for a lot of families?
Well, everybody's on a journey, and often, when I hear a parent say my child is lazy or doesn't care or isn't disciplined, I now know that's all those are words that describe mental health issues. There's no child in the world who woke up in the morning and wanted to be lazy and indisciplined and get yelled at by their parents. They're struggling. So the first thing I think is to be aware that anybody who seems like a bad kid is really a struggling kid, and then the question is whether you're at a stage where you need medical intervention or whether it's early enough that you can have sort of social and psychological and community intervention, so more connections to their peers, more better sleep. We talked about that. Some form of physical activity is known is correlated with better mental health. Making sure you're eating nutritious food and not the junk food that so many of us live on. Certainly getting off the screens a little bit just so your brain can slow down a little bit. The screens, if nothing else, they get your neurons firing in a way that's not healthy to be on 24/7.
And to remember that depression and other mental health conditions are not character flaws, weaknesses, or personal failings. they are absolutely legitimate medical issues.
This is something that often is brain chemistry, or now it's gotten to a point where it is brain chemistry and also emotional hygiene issues that you're going to need a medical professional, and maybe you need medicine. But at least get a medical professional to work with your child and your family to try to, get back on course. And I'm not a huge advocate for medicine, but we all know people for whom medicine has been the answer and allow you to be a thriving person who happens to struggle a little bit with their brain health.
How are your children, and how are you now?
We are right now doing pretty well. I always like to knock on wood because,
Yeah.
The kids usually won't tell me till later that it wasn't going all that well. But right now, everybody seems to be in a good place and starting to build lives and careers and relationships, and so we're taking advantage of this respite to count our blessings and renew our commitment to trying to make the changes to mental health, which I think is almost our family mission now, is to do what we can to make other people feel comfortable seeking care, and help them navigate to that care while also trying to change the system in ways that we can.
So Terry, his story really highlights how difficult it is for parents to navigate when their kids are having mental health crises, even figuring out that that's what's going on. Like, what's the difference between normal, tough adolescence, which just gets tougher, it seems like, every year, and then adding in what mental health issues can do to that. And we're also, I think, as child-focused a culture as we are, we think we have to put the kids first. I've always taught my clients that we need to look at it in a different way. And Craig, I think, really kind of brings this out. Children rest on the foundation of their parents' mental health. So parents' mental health is the foundation. You want your kids, is like your furniture or whatever you're building, to sit on a solid foundation. But parents, as the foundation, have to rest on solid ground. And Craig talked about the fact that without resources and support and readily accessible information, and sort of parents being able to have this support system, or the fact that it does take this village, parents can struggle with their own mental health as they're dealing with their children's mental health issues. If parents' mental health isn't good, it really compromises their ability to help their kids or get resources. So I've always said we kind of need to do it the other way around. Build and investigate the support system. Parents, take care of yourselves first. The oxygen mask idea, take care of yourself first, even though it seems counterintuitive to do that. Then we've got what we need to take care of the kids. We've got the resources and the support network. We've got good mental health ourselves. Then we can help our kids. We can't say we got to put the kids' mental health first when it's in crisis. Nothing else is there. Nothing else is there to actually make that work.
It's an important lesson, and it's also really hard to do, I think. And Craig shared in the interview that he and his ex-wife had very differing views on that, because when you say, I am going to blank for myself, whether that's get out for a bit or go to bed when things are riled or whatever it might be, that can be looked at and seen as checking out. That can be like, how irresponsible. Well, what do you mean his child's in crisis? I just saw him at the gym. I mean, there's so much judgment and everything around that too. And perhaps risk. I mean, it's a really hard thing to know when it's safe to say, you know what, I'm leaving, because what if something happens? That's on you, It'd be easy to think that it's, if you'd only made a different choice, if you'd only focused on them instead of yourself, that's hard.
Yeah. And I don't think nothing can ever be black and white, all or nothing. There are going to be times where you'll need to compromise your self-care or how you get that based on whether you're at a critical place, or, if you are a parent and you're afraid to leave the house, we're going to still recommend you do something good for yourself inside the house. Like, there's going to be those times where we don't want to give it all up. It's not all or nothing, my kid or me. It's got to be, I still matter as the parent. I still need to be able to access, help for myself, self-care, resources, And at the same time, my kid is important. It's not an either or.
Got it. So there's a whole nother aspect to Craig's story too, which is the corporate part. And the day his daughter got out of a residential treatment program was the same day he got the call that his son was going to be arrested, and the same day that he was let go from his job, in part because his performance, because of everything that was going on in his life and his family, had been compromised. Had he been in the middle of a family health crisis, and, you know, we're differentiating that from mental health because can't say that, he would have had very different support system, right? It would have been, hey, how's your daughter doing? How's your wife doing? How's your son doing? Whatever it might have been. You know, the casserole syndrome, you know, what can we do? You know, can we get you out for the night? You know, all those things. But when, because of stigma, we keep what's going on in our house silent and private because it's a shameful secret, then we can't get that support. So he marched back in and said, hey, let me tell you what's been going on. And, you know, he told his peers, he told the higher ups, and he told board members. And Johnson & Johnson ended up creating a position of mental health ambassador for him. And it was originally intended, as I recall, to be an internal position. And then because of the great need in the community and the world, it has become an outward facing position. Again, he recently retired, but his work continues. And to be able to say, hey, you know, compassionate leave or whatever those programs or expressions are, you know, to say, I apologize if I wasn't as, well, I don't know what the conversation would be, you know, that my focus has been a little off. My child's in crisis. And to be able to say that the same way you could say, my child's been in the hospital. So that is another part of this discussion that I think is really important. And I think more and more since COVID, businesses and corporations are understanding that line and the need to acknowledge that mental health, ours and the people in our spheres, affects us and our performance.
Right. I mean, having the title, having a position of a mental health ambassador, having the words to describe compassionate care leave, so that, again, nobody's whispering about it. I mean, people can talk about it. If we can talk about it, we've got the words for it. Next thing is, people are going to learn how to support people in the position that Craig was in with his kid. So that's what we're looking for. Some of it is stigma that people won't come over with the casserole. They won't come over for respite. Some of it is because we can't talk about it, people don't know what to do in that situation. So again, first things first, we got to be able to talk about it. Once we can talk about it, we can educate, and it's okay then to say, here's the role I can take to support you and your family. So I love that this was a positive thing that came out of that. I'm
just going to end real quickly reading a little bit from something that Craig wrote. He said, nothing would have changed if I had not started talking about my challenges. The tradition of keeping personal and professional lives separate, we now understand, especially in the mental health space, has led to untold tragedy and trauma. Corporations will lose very good employees because they didn't take the time to give them the support they needed. And of course, then he also cautions employees not to share everything about their struggles, just enough to get the support they need, because we are still entitled to privacy. Yes. Good point. Yeah, and we'll link to a video that Craig made with Johnson & Johnson that addresses a lot of these topics, and it's a very concise and obviously professionally produced video that is well worth the time it takes to watch. So thanks, Craig, and thanks, Anita. Thanks, Terry. We truly hope that our podcast brings a little more understanding, helps you better articulate and reflect on your own experience with depression, or better understand how to support someone else who is struggling. If this episode has been of comfort or value to you, know that there are hundreds of others like it in our archive, which you can easily find at our website, givingvoicetodepression.com. And remember, if you're struggling, speak up, even if it's hard. If someone else is struggling, take the time to listen.